Well, welcome back to Pastors on Porn, and today I want to share with you a talk that I gave to a group of therapists around how to help people around the area of porn recovery. So if you are looking for some ideas around what to perhaps do or not to do, or you are a therapist or you know somebody that would like to grow in their skills, I want to share a little bit regarding a trip I took recently. I was invited to come down to Las Vegas. I've been working with 3 different churches in the Las Vegas area and also a large counseling group. And one of the directors of that counseling group said, "We'd love you to come down." I flew down with a friend of mine. My wife said that would be a good idea. So me and my buddy George, we flew down to Las Vegas, and we spoke to a group of counselors, group of therapists, and talking to them about how to help somebody who is struggling with unmanageable sexual behaviors, struggling with sexual brokenness. So today I want to share with you a talk I gave to this group of therapists. And again, it might be helpful for you if you are seeking to help somebody as a pastor, if you're also looking for help yourself, or let's say on your staff you have counselors who are wondering what are some things to do and not to do. This may be helpful. And let me again, one more time say, if you are in Christian ministry and you are looking for a safe place to turn, you have some things that have crept into your life, perhaps porn, perhaps something similar, and you're going, I really need help, but I don't know who to talk to, where to turn, what would be a safe place for me to have this conversation. I would love to hear from you. You can connect with me, Vern, at bandofbrothers.care at gmail.com. And I have a number of different groups of pastors. Some guys are in seminary, some guys are youth pastors, but we collect guys together and create a safe place where you can tell a little bit more and seek hope and healing in terms of your journey in a safe, confidential place. So let's turn to a talk I gave. Again, this is I gave last week to a group of therapists down in the Vegas area. So here we go. Well, hi, everybody. First of all, let me say this. I am not a certified clinician or a therapist. I'm speaking to you as a person who has struggled with porn most of their life, and I guess in finding some helpful solutions, have also found a degree of effectiveness in helping others who are in the same need of recovery and healing. And yes, let me also say this. I have been a pastor for 30 years, and many years as a pastor, I struggled with porn. So there is a lot of shame, pain, and struggle in my story. It took me really until I was around the age of 55 before I would say I truly learned, with the help of God and other men, to walk in freedom from porn. So I guess all that means is I am a really, really slow learner. But nevertheless, I think I am a walking testament to the truth of 2 Corinthians 1:4 that says this: God comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. So I think my life is a bit of a testimony to that reality. And it really is to brag on God and brag on those who walked along with me in this process. Let me also say this, as somebody who has been a pastor for 30 years and have now recently transitioned the church, the lead pastor role, to a younger couple, one of the things that I have found so exciting in this new leg of my journey has been the challenge around retooling my people helping skills to help people both inside and outside the church in the area of porn recovery. I now work with guys across the faith spectrum, people who don't necessarily share my faith background. Sure, I do work with Christians, and some of the Christian pastors I think are Christians as part of that. But I work also with guys in working with just average guys that have no faith background. Some of the guys would say that they have deconstructed their faith. Some of the guys would say they are trying to reconstruct their faith. I've worked with Muslims. I've worked with JWs. I've worked with people who have faith beliefs that I don't even totally understand. But it's actually been neat. The only commonality the guys I work with is this: they want to quit looking at porn and they want to move towards a better life. And I guess at this part of my faith journey, it's been really exciting for me to learn to incorporate God's truth in a way that meets people where they're at. So if you're a therapist or you're trying to help somebody in the area around porn, I want to share some basic things that I think you should keep in mind. And again, this is only things that I've learned from my life and also in working with others. So let's speak to you as a therapist. How is it possible that something like porn could come up in one of your therapy sessions? Well, the obvious one is because they bring it up. Your client brings it up. Or probably more likely, their spouse brings it up. Or their spouse makes their client bring it up. Most people I start working come to me because porn has now dealt them and left them with a relational issue. And they're now feeling pressured to work on this issue in their life if they want the keys in their house or their bedroom to still work. So that's probably the most common scenario where porn is raised as an issue where I end up working with guys. But let me also say this. I'm also increasingly seeing individuals or single people who are recognizing that porn is a challenge to them and they don't like what their porn lifestyle is leading them into or where it's leading them. And really from their own frame of reference or perhaps their relationship with God is they're wanting to move away from it without any outside pressure. And I find that really exciting because that means that they are learning to deal with this from their own frame of reference. Even guys that come to me because in one sense they're made to come to me, very quickly, if they're going to be successful, they need to find their own reasons, not just the reason of their girlfriend or their fiance or their wife. So that's a reason how porn could come up. Let me also say this. Sometimes I think in working with somebody, you might suspect that you're not getting the real goods with what they're sharing. It's like the iceberg example. They're sharing a few things above the water and you're going, it seems to me or it feels to me or maybe the Spirit of God is nudging you to say, I bet there's a whole lot more going on under the surface. So let me ask this. Under what circumstances could you perhaps be led to the question that there perhaps is a closely guarded porn secret at play in their lives? Here's some indications that I would look for. Number one, your client talks about a lack of joy or interest or pleasure in life. The book Thrilled to Death by the late Christian doctor, Dr. Archibald Hart, he discusses this word anhedonia, where he talks about the inability to experience joy or pleasure in life. And he says that is often the end result of allowing, or when people allow the pleasure center of their brain to be hijacked by thrill-based pursuits. You know, you couldn't get something more thrill-based than the novelty, for example, around internet porn. From one image, one video to the other, each one creating their own thrill, their own chemical hit, all of those things. Now, because of perhaps their ingrained thrill-based secret pursuits, now it feels like for them life feels blah, meh, gray. So that could be something that would maybe tweak you to that possibility. Another one is perhaps you're dealing with a client who would describe themselves as always agitated, restless, or irritated. For example, on the agitated, restless side, I would say this, that one of the things people who've worked with guys who struggle with porn is they notice the high correlation between people who would be classic ADD or ADDHD and people who also find themselves drawn to porn. Now, it's not a one-to-one relationship, don't get me wrong, but oftentimes people who are of that diagnosis or who struggle in those areas will find that porn gives them a sense of focus. It calms them down to some degree. Now, you might say, is that a chicken or the egg thing? Did porn cause it, or does that condition lead to porn pursuits? I don't know about that. But the other word I gave was irritated. Maybe their children or their spouse would say, they're just always grumpy. That old t-shirt, sometimes I wake up in the morning grumpy, sometimes I just push grumpy over, But people often who are struggling with porn are agitated, they're unhappy, they're grumpy, they're irritable. And those are often signs. So those are some more. Here's another one that is often correlated with men who are struggling with porn. You will hear them share things that sound a lot like shame or self-worth issues. Patrick Carnes, kind of the godfather of the sexual addiction field, he says the number one belief of sex addicts, if we want to use that term, is that they are bad, unworthy. They believe they are bad, unworthy people. And it's that very shame belief that fuels their sexual cycle. So if you hear or you're talking to somebody who has horrible self-talk, again, it might be, I use the word might, be another indication of a secret porn addiction. Again, I'm not the therapist here. I'm just telling you what I've seen. Now, when I was invited down here, I asked the fellow who invited me, I said, tell me what would be a success in your mind. What would you hope for as I talk to the group of therapists who work in your office? And this is what he said. He says, I want you to address this issue. You have a client in your office who is opening up to you about a porn addiction or some other unwanted sexual behavior. What are some of the things that would be helpful as a therapist in creating a healing therapeutic approach? And what are some things to avoid? So let me give you a few things. Again, this is from my own experience, my own life, things that I have found helpful. Again, you can take them and filter them through your own theological and educational framework, but I'm just going to share the things that I use. And I want to talk about maybe how I approach people, the lens that I approach people through. Number one, I approach people through the lens of sexual brokenness, far more than the lens of sexual sin. And the reason I do that, and again, I'm not saying that there's not sin involved. That's the pastoral side, or the preacher side of me. But the reason I like the lens of sexual brokenness is it really counteracts this whole narrative of shame, which they're completely covered in. You see, people with unwanted sexual behaviors are already loaded down with shame. If, for example, you're dealing with a woman who's struggling with shame, they're loaded down even more because that's even more seen as outside the norm. Of course, it's becoming more of the norm in society. Here's another one I've dealt with, shame issues. Guys, for example, who consider themselves straight, but they're drawn to viewing gay porn, for example. That's a very, very shameful experience or something they don't want to share or don't want to talk about. The commonality is shame. Again, people who come to me feel like, one, they are a moral failure, steeped in shame. Number two, they feel that they are in some sense powerless to change. They feel defeated, and they've been trying for years possibly to overcome what's going on in their lives. And number three, they're scared to death of other people finding out. If somebody comes to you and they're from a church background, or they're on church staff, but that often only exacerbates, I love that word, exacerbates. It exacerbates their sense of being a failure. I've heard people that have said things almost like, God must be disgusted with me. And I think the church culture has often added to this so many, simple, 5 steps to overcome lust. All you need to do is this. Things that well-meaning pastors would share with people that they haven't lived out or struggled with themselves. Or maybe even the pastor sharing it is hiding his own unsuccessful attempts to deal with sexual brokenness. But oftentimes the church has given some sort of simplistic advice, like all you need to do is these steps, right? And it's just been helpful, and it's made guys feel like even more of a failure. Now, let me just say this. Now, this is no big secret to you if you're a therapist or in a helping profession. You've probably figured this one out a long time ago. Making somebody feel bad about their behavior is not a catalyst for lasting change. See, I know that from my experience. If all I needed to do was feel bad about my behavior, and that was the key to help me change, well, doggone it, I would have changed 30, 40 years ago. So just feeling bad or pointing out how something falls short of God's standard for our lives, or how it's hurting our marriage, or all of these things, just making somebody or using the principle of shame or guilt or whatever to make somebody feel bad about themselves on the hope that they now change is ineffectual at best. In fact, it only reinforces the shame, which leads to deeper secrets. Again, is it sin? Absolutely. I have just found brokenness to be a better approach. When somebody comes to me, I talk about the fact that you are not a broken person. You have a broken arm, for example. That for me is a much more, we got to splint that arm. We got to let that arm heal. But you are not a bad, unworthy person. Sometimes, and I've spoken about this on one of my podcasts, sometimes therapists will, in one sense, correctly diagnose one of the problems, but then they will give very poor solutions, maybe out of their lack of faith background or whatever. So here's an example. So, and this, you often see this in a sex positive approach. We'll just call that sex positive. And what they'll say is, well, I think the problem is shame. Okay. So we got to deal with shame. So let's deal with it this way. As a therapist, I want to normalize your sexual behavior or your sexual boundaries, and just say it doesn't matter what you do sexually. It shouldn't cause you to shame. Let's just eliminate all of those boundaries you were raised with. So one of my guys who went to a therapist said, well, the problem is you didn't have enough sexual partners before you got married, so that's why you're still trying to seek it now. Or it's really okay for you to have this girl on the side, other than your wife, because a man has needs, right? Or maybe you should invite your wife to look at porn with you. Or, I've heard some crazy sorts of advice secondhand that people have heard from therapists. So their approach to is, okay, well, shame is a problem. So let's just try to eliminate what we believe is the thing that causes shame, which is those boundaries that you were raised with. We know that's not the answer. That just leads to a whole new set of problems and complications. So I just want to, and sometimes I've heard this from Christian therapists, and maybe some of you here have thought about this as well. There has been such a backlash to maybe some of the really harsh implications or some of the ways that the purity movement of the 90s was applied in people's lives, where there was all sorts of there might have been some good, healthy desire to teach young people around healthy Christian sexuality. But then some of the harsh implications of that were, you're only pure unless, if you're a virgin. And if you've had sex, we'll take that ring off because you're now damaged goods. Or the real problem is women and their shameful dressing, and men, we got to avoid women, and all of those kind of things that sometimes came out of the purity movement. So I think as a result of that, we sometimes want to back away from anything that would cause men to address sexual brokenness in their lives. But it does need to be addressed. And the way I address it is I address it as something like a broken arm, something that needs hope and healing, something that needs a splint, something that we can do. I don't pour more shame and guilt on them. So that's the first thing. I like to use a brokenness lens or a paradigm rather than a shame paradigm. Here's the second thing that kind of guides me. I prefer to use the language of habit more than the language of addiction. I used to be a part of a 12-step group, and they were like really rigid on this. Unless you call yourself a sex addict, you will never get any better. And I just struggled with that because it was like, so that's my new identity, a sex addict. More recently, I like what they said, addiction or is really something which is more of an experience than an identity. And I really like that. But let me tell you what I like the most. I like looking at my struggles with things like porn through the language of habit. Because when I think of, and it might be an extreme habit, and it might be a habit which leads to all sorts of negative consequences. But when I call something a habit, then it's like I can put away habits. I can develop new habits. For me, it uses some of the ideas from CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, that I know you guys have trained in. For me, when I use the word habits, it moves away from a fixed mindset towards a growth mindset, right? And so I like that. In fact, if you're looking for a great resource for this whole thing, there is a great website called purityispossible.com, especially if you're a habit of CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. You want to get into that and really examine maybe some of the intersections between struggling with perhaps porn cravings of those things and CBT principles like reframing and a growth mindset. That's a great website, purityispossible.com. So that's the second lens, the idea of habit rather than addiction. Another lens that I like to use in working with guys is something you're probably all familiar with, and you all do naturally as therapists, it's the lens of story, where you're really saying to people, let's talk about the story of your life. Let's see this particular struggle, but let's see this within the broader context of your life story. Because if you look at this in some way, you are going to see where sexual brokenness became embedded in your life story, probably in a particular time in your life, because of a particular unmet need that you had or a particular event which happened in your life. There's three words that I always tell guys that I want you, when we talk about our stories, that I want you to view your story with. And it's not shame. I want you to view your story through kindness, compassion, and even curiosity. Because again, you can draw oftentimes a very clear line between somebody's life story and the place where sexual brokenness became embedded in their lives. And if you don't deal with that, if you don't talk about that, if you don't break that connection, you have to deal with that underlying operating system that people continue to run back to whenever they have a sexual urge. They respond in a certain way. They learned to do this when they were 6 or 8 or 10 or 12. And as a result, you begin to look at those linkages in their lives. And if you don't do that, you'll simply be dealing with a Band-Aid approach. One of the common things that guys often do, or when something like porn or a wife will tell her husband he needs to do is, something like porn will be identified as a problem. The very first thing guys will do is, okay, I got to go and get a porn filter for my computer or my phone. And you know what? That's not a bad thing to do. I have Covenant Eyes on my computer and my phone, and I find it helpful, especially in the aspect of my urges or my impulses. I can do things simply impulsively, in a fraction of a second. So having a good filter on those things helps give me more of a lead time to let my better angels prevail, so to speak. So, but for me, that's not a bad start, but that's only a step. You have to begin to get at a story understanding of what it is what unmet need am I trying to meet in my life by running to porn? What is really going on? Where's the error? What is the pain that I'm trying to medicate? When did I first associate this pain and running to porn? Those kind of things. In one sense, you become a little bit of a detective, or even an archaeologist, to uncover what's been going on in your life. And that's one of the things in our Finding Traction course that we do, that we explore with guys. Again, I'm not a therapist, but sometimes just asking basic questions, sometimes the lights will start going on in men's lives. Now, the last word I used around this story idea was the word curiosity. And you go, I don't think I want to be curious about, curiosity is what killed the cat. Curiosity is what got me in trouble. But one of the guys I found really helpful is Jay Stringer, the therapist Jay Stringer. And he has a book called Unwanted. And he begins to ask this question. He actually poses the question, have you ever asked God, he says, to help you understand your lust? Have you ever asked people, why is it they're attracted to certain things? And he actually says that there's value, now in a guided way, I would say, there's value in asking God and exploring, why am I attracted to certain sorts of fantasies or certain sorts of sexual behaviors? And in asking those why questions, we actually can begin to identify some of those areas in our life story where we often turn to. So, for example, if you were raised in a highly rigid family and you came out of it with a degree of simmering anger, have you ever explored why perhaps your fantasies or the porn that you're drawn to has a lot of you being in control and dominating other people? There's anger. It's eroticized anger. Why do you think you're drawn to that kind of porn? Well, perhaps there's aspects in your story. Other times he talks about if you were detached, if you were grow up where you had no comfort in your lives, or you were a latchkey kid, you're drawn to certain sort of women, certain sort of stories, certain sort of fantasies where you were the one comforted. He even shares that perhaps, and this kind of blows my mind, women who have been the subject of abuse will often look for certain sort of abusive pornography in some way to try to work out or in a broken way try to either replay or react to what was done to them. Again, that's where a story lens can be really helpful. And you guys as therapists are extremely well trained in that. You know the importance of family systems behavior. You know the importance of some of these kind of things. Okay, the fourth lens that I would use in working with guys is this. I use the lens of seeing people as having a life problem, not just a porn problem. Oftentimes people look for, I just need a filter. Well, yeah, but a filter is not going to change your life. One of my favorite porn recovery quotes is this: porn is not your chief problem. Porn is just your favorite solution. Well, I mean, yeah, it is a problem, but it's the solution that you reach for. You know, what are the unmet needs you're trying to meet? What are the problems you're trying to solve? What is the pain you're trying to medicate? Porn is your favorite solution. So again, as therapists, this is where things like attachment issues or trauma or abuse or the role you played in your family becomes really important. Where did you get stuck in your life story? And where did porn enter? Where did your maturation, in one sense, get put on pause? And now you continually turn to these sorts of sexual practices as some sort of, it's like a surrogate coping strategy. So again, it's a life problem. And I would like to say that as you begin to look at your life problems, it's oftentimes interesting, how in one sense you begin to drain the swamp that all of those mosquitoes, breed in, all the larvae that comes out of having swampy parts in your life. One of the bylines I use in my podcast, one of the podcasts I do is called Finding Traction, and it's just for regular guys. These are not guys in ministry, regular guys who are wanting to get better. And I talk about moving away from porn and moving towards the life and relationships they've always desired or always wanted. And the reason I do that is to go back to this idea of you have a life problem. I find it interesting, some of the words that guys will use to describe their life with porn are words like aimless or drifting. They procrastinate. They're bored. They're listless. Some of those kind of words. So you talk to somebody and you say, describe to me your life. You will get all of those kind of words. You will rarely get words like engaged or excited or ambitious or motivated. And you think to guys, well, you really have not just a porn problem, you have a life problem. So one of the things that we do in helping guys is we don't just talk about porn per se. We talk about all of the rest of their lives. Where and how are you taking self-care seriously? Where are some good, healthy, life-giving passions in your life that you were looking to and turning to? Yeah, obviously porn has been a passion in your life that's caused all sorts of destructive results. But how do we now begin to replace those with good, healthy, life-giving patterns? See, that's also part of what it means to help guys. And as they do that, porn, in one sense, loses some of its power in life. The last thing that I use and I help guys with is the lens of connection rather than isolation. There's a great recovery quote that says this: the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but connection. I've heard people say, a reliance on porn is at the core is an intimacy attachment disorder. If those are the case, we need to learn to help people better connect with other people. We need to help people learn to relate to other people. Now, again, I think individual therapy and the things that you guys do is great. I often will suggest somebody goes to therapy when they're dealing with a particular stuck issue in their life, and a therapist would be super helpful for them in overcoming. But I will say this, and again, I'm not denigrating the counseling industry, but I would say this: the vast majority of guys need some sort of group to walk with as they seek to recover from porn in their lives. They need a group of guys where they learn to be honest. Some of these guys have told so many lies in their life, and now they need to learn to be honest. They need to talk about their issues. They need to take hope from other guys who are having similar struggles. And in one sense, they need to be led by someone who can both relate to them, but can also act as a bit of a Sherpa guide who are ahead of them and drawing them forward. I've never seen somebody who dealt with porn simply by going to a therapist or simply on their own. The one question I've been asked sometimes is, well, how long does it take for somebody, let's say in this setting, maybe they're getting some therapy and now they're connecting with a group of guys. What is a normal time frame for somebody? Let's say somebody who's had porn embedded in their lives for 5, 10, 20 years, for example. Sometimes it's longer than that. How long are we talking about? From my experience, it takes a good 2 to 3 years of consistent, focused recovery work to truly not only change the trajectory of their lives, but to consolidate those changes and create a brand new pattern, brand new way of dealing with conflict, brand new way of dealing with porn, brand new way of dealing with impulses. It often takes a good 2 to 3 years. Now that might be like, oh my goodness. Now, that's way too long. Now let me just say, oftentimes I see guys often making real significant changes within 6 months. But in order to really consolidate that, to really solidify that, I've often seen it takes guys 2 to 3 years to really experience all the long-term results in their lives. And obviously along the way, they need to see, and they will see good things that begin to come into their lives now because they're walking a new path. But if guys are playing, as the old recovery stuff, guys are just taking half measures. They're not serious about learning and growing and taking the necessary steps. Then they just stay stuck. Even guys in a group, the group can encourage them to take the steps. They can see guys taking the steps, but everyone individually needs to take it seriously. So in closing, I know we're going to ask some questions here, but in closing, I've given you a couple resources already. I spoke about the book Unwanted by Jay Stringer, a good CBT website, purityispossible.com. A couple other resources that I would perhaps use or look to. One of them, probably the best book for somebody from a Christian background, that for me is probably the most, it comes at the struggle with porn from many different helpful perspectives, is John Michael Cusick's book called Surfing for God. And that uses the idea of the old G.K. Chesterton quote, the man who knocks on the door of a brothel is really just knocking for God. He just puts that into a modern context, say, the man who is constantly surfing for porn on the internet is surfing for God, really at the deepest core of his heart. And he not just talks about spiritual things, but he gets into unwanted needs. He gets into all sorts of practical things. That is an amazing book, Surfing for God. I'd encourage you to pick up. So Unwanted, Surfing for God. The other couple things I would say is I really like Andrew Bowman's material. Both Andrew Bowman and Jay Stringer, and I think the last guy that I mentioned, Michael Cusick, I think they're all kind of connected with Dan Allender out of Seattle, the therapist Dan Allender, who does a lot of work with trauma and sexual abuse as well. But Andrew Bowman has a couple books which are a collection of essays. One is called The Sexually Healthy Man, and the other is called The Psychology of Porn. And Bowman is spelled Bauman. So, and again, I have a couple podcasts. My podcast for guys in ministry is the one you're listening to, which is, what's it called? Pastors on Porn. That's what it's called. And then the other podcast I do, which is just a regular recovery podcast, is called Finding Traction. So with that, we are going to hear some questions, and we'll go from there. So thank you very much. Well, guys, that is the essence of what I said to a group of a chunk of therapists. And if you know somebody, a therapist who maybe wants to hear a little bit more or wants to connect with me, Or maybe, for example, I have, as this counseling center did, maybe there's somebody in the therapist office who wants to start a group for guys like this office did, or they just want somewhere to send somebody to connect with somebody in perhaps a Zoom group in addition to the therapy they're receiving. I'd love you to reach out to me. Again, my name is Vern, and you can get a hold of me at bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. Till next time, see you then.